What's that?
Like a dog.
Slurp, slurp, slurp. Sounds like my plumbing problem.
It's my dog. Sorry about that.
Hopefully that was a bowl and not the toilet or something like that.
Yeah, it was a ball, fortunately.
It is the appointed hour of 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining in or Zooming in. Special welcome to the media. Glad you all are able to join us. And as we get started, I want to first start by saying thank you to staff for the blood, sweat, and tears going into creating the budget scenarios. And thank you for all your thoughtful work. Our mission this evening is to review staff's recommendations, to discuss our priorities, and to reach a consensus to consider for adoption of a budget on Thursday. As talking with several folks in normal years of the budget, we know, for instance, we may be staring down a hole of $500,000, so we go and embrace that hole of $500,000. And sometimes we end up in a better situation. With this, we have no idea what 2021 will bring. And so again, very appreciative to council members taking the time to read through the budget, to think through scenarios and make recommendations, and give us what we're working with this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim for your remarks and guidance through the documents.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I also want to say thank you to Jake Adams, Gary Swink, and the leadership team who have done the majority of the heavy lifting as we've continued to review the budget and the changes that we see in the environment around us and the information that we are provided with. Jake is going to lead us through the changes in the budget, the updates that we've made, the revisions, etc. But first, I wanted Janie to put something up on the screen, Mr. Mayor, that you shared with me earlier today. The Monday morning outlook. Janie, I hope you've got that. And really, I'm going to send it to all of you council members, but I want to point out the highlighted areas. And again, the mayor's already seen these 4 highlights. It looks like some rough going ahead of us. And we've taken a very conservative approach to the budget. No increases in the tax rates. We've got a little bit of a deficit. We've kept the schools almost 100. I think responded to the challenge very well. We'll have to wait and see what else evolves. It could be rough financially for all of us here in Lexington. So, Jake, are you ready to take it on this document? Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right, budget scenarios sheet for me, please, council. I just want to start off and kind of summarize these scenarios a little bit for you. know you've probably seen a few different versions that have been sent your way. This has been almost a daily evolving process. We're constantly looking at the budget on a daily basis, getting the latest numbers, finding the latest cuts where we can, anticipating the latest revenue projections. So this has been many different versions over, and I think tonight we have a good recommendation for proposal. But I'd just like to walk through kind of what the thought process was behind these scenarios. If you may recall, at our last work session, we were looking at about a roughly 5% expense cut in the first proposed budget, from the first proposed budget that you had seen, with anticipated revenue reductions of a little over $900,000. Here you can see in scenario one, and I'll touch on the other two scenarios. Scenario one is what we are targeting right now as what is most likely and what we would like to put forth for consideration of adoption. As you can see on total revenue reductions, we have more than doubled the anticipated revenue drop from our last work session. We're over $2 million in anticipated revenue shortfall in this scenario. So that's roughly a 10.5% expense cut from the budget book. And kind of what we did with this, we kept the same distribution of reduced local revenues as the Virginia First Cities study. However, we increased each of those categories proportionally. So significant increase in sales tax, meals and lodging, BPOL, and real estate and personal property. We did leave it 2.5%. We're currently not anticipating much of a drop off in those taxes at this time. We additionally accounted for reduced state revenues, which we had not done previously. And thank you to Gary for putting together a state revenue reduction projection that I believe was shared with you all previously. This reflects roughly 10% of total state revenues being decreased across the board. Additionally, you'll see some other specific revenue reductions that we have identified so far in this process. And now, Janie, if you could start scrolling down just a little bit into expenses. Most of
Hey,
the
can I ask one question on the revenues, on the reduced arts grant? Is that, I know that's the Lime Kiln Fair. Is that for reduced of both?
that's reduced for both the fair and Lime Kiln grant. Yes. Yeah, and if you could stop. Most of these have not changed appreciably. Point out, we have completely eliminated the proposed duration of the budget. I will end, as of late, I know Tommy has been working closely with the schools in the last several weeks. Budget have factored in revenue losses and decrease and worked to cut their budget accordingly. Through their efforts, they were at last finally left with a roughly $38,000 shortfall. So that's something that we have taken into consideration to be able to cover from the general fund in this budget scenario. If you can continue scrolling on down, Janie, please.
Quick question on that.
Sure.
So 416, we had a other wage and benefit change of just over $71,000, and that expense has been cut to about 40,000.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Let me comment on that, Chuck. We've had so many iterations of this, it's hard to keep track of what's in which component. And we were one time reducing it to 2% pay increase for a half a year, and then we were doing a bonus. So quite honestly, that 71,000, whatever number that we looked at previously, was probably inaccurately calculated. So Jake and I spent a lot of effort to tie these back to the exact budget numbers. So we've tried to get this where it's a little bit more clear. For example, the police chief vacancy, at one point we had originally assumed 2-month vacancy, and then we increased that to 6 months, and now it's full year. So rather than having a little bit here and a little bit there, we tried to get those more just on one line. So that's why that number has changed, Chuck.
Thank you. Janie, if you could continue scrolling down to the recommended section. Yes, thank you. So as you can see, the above expense, most of them you've previously seen, and those are agency, outside agency, regional agency contributions as we've modified the budget. The color are expense reduction options that we've to help us bridge the deficit that we have expenses. Some of these that we previously discussed, and we've continued to add that in as well. We've also added the elimination of recycling collection, elimination of the service only. So no positions would actually on this. The net savings are the two individuals will be reassigned to other vacancies that are currently in the, and the figure you see there is the net savings from eliminating. We've also reduced the expense, maintain the outdoor swimming pool. We can't eliminate it entirely as we've looked at it. There are some expenses that it just was to cut and would probably cost us more money in the long term to do. So we've modified that and been able to cut what we can from maintaining the swimming pool while it's operational this season. We've also agency funding and including the fine arts and lime kiln. We've continued to plan on eliminating that is the local share plus the anticipated grant funding in the 59,000 figure you see. We've also been able to find some savings in park maintenance. Vast majority of park maintenance is in wages and from mowing the fields and parks and keeping them up and going. But we have found some room in reduced water from not watering, not putting down mulch, seeding, etc., that we can cut from parks. We did keep in the concept of possible staff furloughs if revenue projections did worsen, that could be possibly thrown in at a later date. We don't have a number on that, but it is an option on the table to consider. The two items below that, we have come up with some ways to reduce the contribution to the capital projects fund. The $55,000 figure you see there is from eliminating downtown improvements for fiscal year 2023 and playground and parks upgrades for fiscal years 2023 and 2025. We thought that these were appropriate cuts that we could make without causing too much disruption to capital projects, and we were able to stagger them in a way that 1 year they would receive funding, the next year they wouldn't pick up the difference from not receiving funding in certain years.
Jake, if I may, we need to point out that that $1,000 reduction is in addition to the reduction that we looked at the last work session, which is further up spreadsheet.
Yes, thank you, Gary. And that this is on top of CIP projects that we had already cut from previously. Additionally, we're recommending equipment replacement fund transfer by half in the 300 there. In doing this, it's going to be very critical several months into FY21 and beyond to equipment in our fleet to find ways that we could possibly either extend the useful life of our fleet or eliminate vehicles and equipment entirely. When you make a reduction to this contribution, it's not just impacting the next year, but subsequent equipment purchases down the road. So this is one thing that we'll have to keep an eye on closely. If revenue projections are better than anticipated, it's certainly something to the budget. But this will be a constant evaluation as we get into FY21. So as you can see here, the total expense cuts we have are a little over $, again, with revenue reduction of, so we have a deficit right now of $292,194. Janie, questions? Thank you. As you can see at the bottom, under the category Other, if we utilize our current projected FY 2020 surplus carryover, which we've estimated to be $282,000, we can nearly cover that entire deficit, all but about $10,000. So at that point, at this point, we feel pretty confident, Jim and I in discussions, that we can find $10,000 worth of additional cuts somewhere in the budget. We can get to that number. But it looks like in scenario one, we are going to be able to fully cover the deficit that we're projecting from the loss of revenues. As you can see, we have some other options on the table that we're not recommending at this time. And as you can see, you know, some of these are getting into services and into personnel. So these are not things we take lightly, but we have put these options on the table if the situation worsens and revenue projections are worse than anticipated.
Can we skip back for just a sec?
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out what the difference is between the document that was revised 428 that had a deficit of 283,728 and how we got to 292,494 deficit.
Again, I'd have to go back and look at the exact documents, but these anticipated revenue reductions have stayed the same. Anticipated expenses
Right.
constantly added and subtract and had to revise certain expense cuts. We originally had anticipated, for instance, with reducing the swimming pool expense, the entire amount. Subsequently found out that we can't, it's not really feasible to do that. So that's just been a process of further evaluation.
Oh, $10,000. I'll check the document later.
Okay.
There's a number, sure I can rattle all of them off the top of my head. It appears that there may be a vacancy in Raro, and so we've made the assumption that may decide to keep that position vacant for 6. Let's say each locality a little bit of money, not Lexington, but a little bit. I think the iteration that you're talking about, Chuck, we were thinking about actually eliminating public works position for the second half of the year in community support activities. That'd be things like putting up the Christmas decorations, holiday flags, that sort of thing. This current version puts that service back in, but in lieu of that, we've taken out some non-salary expenses in parks, basically irrigation cost and renovation, reseeding of the fields, that sort of thing. Let's see, another thing that changed as recently as this morning, we got the new numbers from the schools, so we had to put in extra, I think $38,000 funding of that. There's probably some other things that have changed that just aren't coming to the top of my head right now. But like Jake said to start with, this has been a moving target and a fast moving target at that.
Okay, I didn't know if it was just something obvious or just shaving here and there, but that's not important right now.
So again, this scenario one is what we're working with, what we're bringing forward for possible adoption. I will share with you the other two scenarios just briefly, and again, we're not recommending these at this time, but we do have it in the back of our minds and wanted to see what the difference would be with increased reductions. So scenario 2 here, I'll just briefly touch upon. This incorporates a larger local tax revenue reduction. So as you can see, we've increased sales tax to 35%, 50% for meals, lodging, and BPOL, and doubled the anticipated reduction in real estate and personal property tax to 5%. And Jane, if we could scroll on to scenario 3, again, none of the expenses have changed. And briefly, you could see there, just scroll past it, but the anticipated deficit in this scenario is obviously much larger at about $550,000. Again, we do have total options to cover that, but however, we're not considering this scenario as likely at this time. Again, to scenario 3, this is our worst case scenario by far. This is a 15% overall revenue reduction. We decided not to try to pick and choose various taxes that would decrease, but just anticipate 15% across the board of all. This is almost $3 million revenue reduction, and projected 800,000. So again, this is a worst case scenario to cover a large bit of that. But again, at this time. So at this point, other questions on the scenarios before
When will we, our year-to-date tax collections in all these categories for, I guess, March, April, May, and I guess June, those year-to-dates of 2020 compared to 19? So I guess a more realistic idea on
Yeah, good question, Chuck. Our sales tax month lag. So at the end of this month, we should have a good index part of the effects of COVID from March. And meals taxes have a 1 month lag. So March, obviously there's been a drop off, but honestly, initially we had thought. I think conclusions on that, I'd like to take a look at what April looks like. End of May, we should have a pretty good understanding of COVID on our tax collections and moving forward from 2 months of data.
When did the students leave town?
I'm not sure. Do you have information on when exactly
When they left town? Well, I know VMI, I think that was just over a month ago.
Okay.
I don't recall exactly, and WNL was, of course, they were back, I believe, or they were here.
It happened about at least by the end of March.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Second to third week of March is what I was.
Back on March 22nd. That's when they did not come back. And just tax, I mean, I think, something more in a month or so, but dependent on if there are events occurring in Lexington, tell us. And we know there haven't been any events. We don't want to use a crystal ball. We can't look into the future, but we can advise if an FY21 event in Lexington that bring people to our hotel rooms. I mean, April, those were always months of 100% occupancy, essentially, for every weekend. As we look down south, Roanoke's projecting 70% decline in their lodging tax next year. 70%. So, let's hope that it's only 40%.
Well, and what you were asking, Chuck, as well about how many months until, it's a moving target. May, June, July, August, September, when we're looking back a month or two and seeing how we're performing vis-a-vis last year and the projections that we've made. So I don't believe we're going to be able to have certainty in July or August what things are going to look like 3 months from then. Again, it's just a moving target. It's a process. It'll depend on a lot on not only my and WNL, but also consumer confidence. Is there a resurgence that impacts how people react?
Well, at the numbers in place, it'll give us a much more accurate, the first 2 quarters of 20, and that, I guess that's what I'm trying to. Of course, that depends on whether start back up again.
I think it all they may open up, but if they hold a normal homecoming, if they hold home them, then we have a good idea in hotel rooms. But if they don't invite their campuses, then the hotel rooms.
I'm confident that seeing the messaging from Virginia Tech and UNC, strong signal from where I'm sitting that once we get a greater deal of what was, and it I guess it would be sort of standard if they have students back on campus, but then have large events that would kind of all attendees to the same risk. My 2 cents.
Do members of the council have any questions on specifically number 1, scenario 1, 10.5% cut?
So 2 things. Options and concerns about are funding. And I'm not clear or pool contribution, but there's nothing there. And along with the other agencies, what they normally would have, is that for us, it's 44, but for them, that's a big, and it's also, up with what Buena Vista and Rockridge County is doing. Like it's not really supporting these agencies. I'm a little concerned, and concern. That's the only concern about the recommended. I don't know how other city council members feel about that.
I agree. I think those are good points. And I'd like to, those are because like in our budget book, I think they're, so I'm not quite clear exactly, but I think it's also a good point Dennis made to, we're following suit with the other localities.
Totally understand, you know, next year we're facing a disaster. I understand these, hey, you know, we can't fund you. I feel like now is the work these organizations. So to preserve that, I would feel a lot better about it. But I mean, I'm really impressed with all the work Jake and Gary did. I mean, I think this is just that particular thing I'm a little concerned about.
Those are good points, and do what a lot of us asked between the last and today. You know, when it comes to and the cuts that we're making in city and to the fire department, police department, and to essentially pushing burdens onto future, if you will, funding to any of these. I want to know if they accessed PPP, that if they did, because we're obviously most of our contribution for the current fiscal year, and we would just be a fiscal year. And I would also point out, I agree it's often very important to be, however, I would point out that they are each, I am dipping into fund balance, to raise taxes in the city. We could raise tax on the real estate rate, and that would yield about $53,000 fund the outside agencies. And so if that's, you know, but I feel like we have cut to the bone our city employees, and I am reluctant to ask any more of the police department, the fire department, city hall, public works. That's just my 2 cents.
On the other options below that, the discretionary non-essential, where it has the decrease in the city council budget, are those recommended and they're included in there?
No, those are not currently included in the scenario for bridging the deficit. Those are just potential option on the table.
Okay, that's what I thought. And what does the decreasing city council budget, what's that include?
I believe that would include salaries as well as basically anything non-essential to the function of government, anything that we can't do without
Conferences,
memberships, training, et cetera, things that they're vital.
You know, I'd like to make a point that Jake made earlier, is as we see the year progress, whether it's September, October, December, if things are going well, we can refund or put those agencies back in the budget. However, if we fund them today and things go worse next fall, we've spent the money on those agencies and we can't get it back. And that's my concern right there. So I think we need to take more of a wait and see approach on many of these issues. Hope that we have a little bit more of an optimistic scenario developed between now and the end of 2020, the calendar year. But if not, again, let's be a little convinced and wait and see balance.
Can I ask, does that include the $12,000 housing corporation?
It does, I believe.
Okay, actually, most of those other amounts are very small.
4,000 somewhere, maybe 5,000.
Okay.
My recollection.
Yes.
The arts grant as well. So we donate 4,000 to.
Yeah, that's actually a separate line. It is listed.
Yes, that's correct. And just because I know we'd had some discussion in the past on not potentially affecting that funding due to the state grant match, but just wanted to add that, but keep it separate from the rest.
Sorry about that.
I have a question related. If we could go back up, I just want to cut. You don't have a percentage next to this? There's nothing going on in the summer?
Here is budget cuts that they were previously able to, 6 months vacancy of a position. Funding now, total contribution now for RARO is first.
As far as programs that were cut or the expenses that speak with the director several weeks ago and parks and keeping things the way they are, the expenses at the levels they're currently operating under. Maybe dispute that. You could mow lawn a little cheaper or we could position. at that time. Of course, since then, director resigning, we do have a few more dollars of savings there.
Right, and so I didn't want to bring that up because I wasn't sure if so the 10,200 right now, that does not include or take into consideration the executive directors. Is that correct?
No,
It does include that being in addition to the other cuts that had been previously.
Okay, so it does include 6 months vacancy for that.
I think it would also, we should note that the city can make the unilateral board of RARO.
Okay,
I believe that this is going to be a position county as well as the city, correct, Jim?
I know that as communicating with Spencer, they thought that position they could support. That was, no reason.
Jim, going back to the topic of agents, I recall accurately that Buena Vista is eliminating contributions.
In some of the agencies, like I think it was the library, they're cutting even more funding. They're like at 20% funding cut to the library. They treat it similarly. I think the chamber as well, perhaps our agencies are gone.
Right. So with our regional partners, Buena Vista is already funding anything.
George County will be cutting some agencies because they've been reaching out to some asking for.
Jake or Jim, maybe you can help me, or Gary. The eliminate indoor pool contribution, figure attached to that. I mean, I know that have an agreement to make to the indoor, and in fact, the county is committed to the 13.5, which said they would contribute. So if in fact, and the county pulls out, I mean,
It's included in there though.
In this scenario one, there is point, we took out 10%, and then took out the entire 15,000 actually has the indoor pool fund.
okay, I mean, I think that they are going to be treated like the other discretionary agencies for the 13.5, not the 15. So, and I'm pretty sure that contributing 13.5 to them. So to them, because they do plan on opening, allows it, they can do social distancing with, have their members sign up for an hour. So they are plannable. But I mean, beyond them, I would, the discretionary agency, if there's ever a time to Rockridge Area Health Center or the Y, or time to take up that slack, that's on 4. I mean, we are in a pretty dire, this is a time when these agencies cannot do fundraising. So they really are in a difficult, again, I would, would strongly lobby if it makes more sense to daily basis, so that way we can have a sense of the fall and the winter. I have to speak out,
but well to go back around to the ages. What can you live with, or what can you live dealing with all the same stuff? David has pointed out, Lime Kiln, that they're cut, but when you go down the list, what would be a reasonable cut for them with it,
right,
from their response? Yellow Brick Road for $1,000. What if Jim said to them, can you live with 100% cut? Can you live with no cut? A reasonable approach, because I think some are more able to absorb.
I'm concerned the impression that our city manager and finance director rounds of asking our city department head their budget, and then look again at their budget, and then can you cut a little? And so we've gone to Chief Dickerson, Riley, and so on, Jeff Martone, and we've asked so much of them to cut. And I'm not sure I hear anyone asking to reinstate funding to our departments. And so should we, before we, because before we go out to, I have received money from the Payment Protection Plan, and may matters, they can fundraise, but our police department cannot fundraise they don't. If folks are looking at spending more money being proposed to us, are there places we've cut really close to the bone city services that might impact city in any respect? Throw that out there.
I will say I'd like to look at it, and I agree with what Jim had said. Keep it in, and when we're going to evaluate this adjustments like we do now, but there'll probably be more severe adjustments than a quarterly budget amendment and things the money back in. But I would. It's roughly without the housing $1,000. It's small amounts to each of these agencies applied specifically for a specific project, which a lot of those projects probably aren't being done. I don't know if Jim has the time to go back to all those agencies and check on this. I agree with Maid.
I do too, because I think what scenario one work, it shares or us, I know it isn't lost on us, but taking from future years of when we should be putting forth, $600 into equipment replacement fund, and we'll pay for that in future years, project fund transfers. So if we have years, not borrowing almost, and God knows something that's important to us, that there continues to be nothing in the budget for Jordan's point. And if I were to be opening up, if I were to find $30,000 for agencies or something right within budget, maybe we should be looking forward to Jordan's Point Park. I think we can do that right now, given this budget. So I am just that Jake and Gary, Jim are department heads, because I know they've on this and they've done exactly what we've asked. And
They're being not appreciated of Jim, and Jim presented us options. I'm just saying that's cutting too deep on those funds, and sent these agencies letters saying that they would best. So that, anyway, I won't say any more. That's my concern about it. I feel like, all right, I won't say any more about it.
Dennis, I want to assure you concern in all of your concerns. I would say quarter of next year, we take a good hard look at where if things are going well, within quarter of the fiscal year next year, we can that funding if things are going well.
Okay.
The position of saying that funding is coming and out things are worse, and then what? Worse, I don't want to be negative, but there are implications, indications that the economy is going to struggle for some time.
When we started this meeting, I made a hole, say a 500,000, and then we fill it. We just have absolutely no idea. And the professional, our staff coming up with the scenarios for us to consider, $3 million just sends chills down my spine. At that point, and continuing, we're all in this together. So where we get and where we end up in 2021 is more crapshoot than ever. But I think for Chuck and Marilyn, this may be like deja vu all over again from agency discussions. Nobody wants to cut them. I'd love to double what we're giving them because they do great work. However, it's not necessarily the core function of government. And none of them, I don't think, are relying, their operations are not dependent upon our contributions. So I offer that from a personal point. And as someone pointed out, I don't know who to get taxes a penny to fund all those aid steal from the fund balance if we choose to as the year progresses. Brick Road is going out of business because we haven't made our $1,000 contribution. We can steal from the fund balance and fund that. The contribution to Mountain View, people's roof subsidized housing. Housing is critical. Child care, so many of these things are so very important and so significant. They're really, really difficult decisions. If they were easy a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and counting sunny days, as it were. But I respect and appreciate you raising the issue, out for these efforts because they do play a vital role. And I'm hopeful that with things like the foundation and the COVID fund that they've started, that to replace in the coming year lots of things that.
Well, I wish that I could contribute about this, but I'm having to recuse myself that you're discussing. So carry on.
Enough said. Marilyn, is on other parts of the budget or from your perspective?
Much of this, I mean, it's all, but it's something that we have to do. Happen. I like a little bit of the idea of looking at it maybe on a quarterly basis to see where we are. But I don't know how do you make promises to people and then you take it away?
Bad policy.
Yeah.
Bad policy. I
Yeah.
agree. No doubt. And more than ever in 2021, we're going to be watching to see if, as the revenue comes in.
Right. I mean, it could improve or it could get worse. We just don't know. So we have to look at probably the worst case scenario and adjust to that.
Right. If our other attendees have any questions, wish to address, very good. Jim, you're working towards,
Yes, sir.
certainly folks have an opportunity to change has an objection for bringing forward for consider any objection to bringing this forward. So I'm anticipating you're saying nothing. Else you all want to add or observations?
Yes, well, just briefly, vision that we're going to have to revisit the budget situation evolves. I mean, this is a total shot in the dark. This is an exercise, it's an attempt for us to kind of see worst case scenarios could be, what the revenue losses could be, address them. And again, if some of these cuts can be added back in, by all means, what we do, and periodically monitor. And again, just to my discussion on the budget, Janie, page. Yes, and the all fund summary. To see our bottom line. I just want to point this out because it's somewhat confusing. On the budget summary sheets that you see here, deficiency deficit is, you may be asking, well, I saw 292. If you recall, in the original number in the general fund at the bottom line was that represents due to the debt obligation that is owed to the general fund. It's not historically been accounted for as an expense fund, so it shows up as a fund transfer. So it brings the deficit to zero, $120,000 showing on the bottom line on the job. To point that out, as it could be confusing when you're seeing different shortfall numbers thrown around. Some final points, the 52,000 that you see them whole operationally through the general fund planned capital contribution for FY21. The fund has been adjusted. The amount purchased from MSA has been budgeted downward. Water leak issue at VMI. So we have adjusted these with an for our equipment replacement funding it by half. And additionally in our fund, we have reduced that by 55,000. Those are for future years where we thought we could make some cut. So just in summation, this is where we stand right now. This is the impact of scenario one and what we would like to know for proposed budget on Thursday.
I can clarify one thing. I know everyone probably say, does it end meaning no more separating glass, no using the bins? I just want to point that out.
Yes, that is correct. Collection service would be eliminated in its entirety.
Yeah, because from the study that we were showing, cost feasible to even put a public works, because we will bring it back.
How does recycling affect our obligation to recycle? Because anywhere in those any enforcement penalties if localities don't. I guess that's two questions bundled into one.
That's a good question, and something I raised when the idea of first was thrown around. All localities in Virginia must require a 25% recycle rate. However, for a reduced recycle rate due to our population density, 15% regional rate for the solid waste, Lexington, Buena Vista, and the county. BRRA, that's something that we had looked at. I've researched. There are some potential mod waste management plan that may come from failure to meet that, identify any specific penalties or fines of not meeting that minimum 15%. It's something Gary and I have discussed. I imagine a lot of look now with recycling. So I don't believe there'll be a lot of localities that are looking at.
Well, that's helpful to know that our obligation's only 50, I guess, because of the city's density, but that's helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Excellent points. Gary, anything for the good of the cause?
No, I points have been hit. The importance of monitoring actually how the revenues are coming in. I share both Jim and Jake's sense that several other points in time may have to revisit the budget depending on how the revenues have the luxury of adopting this budget and then for another year. I'm afraid that's not going to be the case.
Are we planning that we're looking at 100%? Get a response of, and to Dennis's point, if they money, we're shutting down. We just can't afford to lose it. What case?
Well, first question, I agencies that based on the best data we have and information we currently have, we just cannot put them in the FY21 fiscal year budget. That we'll review the budget and our revenue sources and the economy next fall and through the winter to see if potentially there's room for extending some funding. And then I can also ask if how this will affect their financial position and their future operations here in the community and see what I get back in response and let you know.
Okay, I'm just looking to be prepared for something awkward or uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Certainly not a decision that any of us really embrace. But I think one may have said it best, which we don't want to make commitments that we can't. We'll certainly know more in 6 months. Who many days ago when the Virginia legislature tried to spend a $300 million ourselves streets shot, and who knew what PPP, wild, fast, Jake, and it's reflective of the terrific job that, because I know you knew nothing when you arrived and you were doing a good job. So both of you keep up the good work. Efforts make Jim look even better. So there's nothing else to come before council this evening. Last opportunity. Again, one will come forward with full discussion and work to budget on Thursday. So have a great evening and we will stand adjourned.
Thanks, guys.